Alright, hello and welcome back to my 2.5D RPG in Unity tutorial. Today we are going to be covering having multiple saves and an autosave. So basically it just records, before you change scene, basically it'll record the player's stats and stuff as if you'd saved. So let's go on to how, well, I'll just demo it first actually, sorry. It's a bit earlier than I usually record, so I'm a bit unaware. So first off, we can see we've got a menu for loading, saving, and just quitting and resuming. So if we press tab here, we'll just grab an item from the container. So we'll take some bread. And if we press E to go to the dead city, we'll see that we still have our bread. So, and then you'll just ignore those errors there because they can be fixed. Well, half of them are messages I'm passing in, and the other half are just random bugs that I need to fix next time that aren't to do with this. So they're not that important for the time being, or for implementing loading and saving. So let's just save. So save 001. And remember that we're at this like junction in the dead city, and we have bread on us. So if we do that, and if we load. So we'll see that our autosave, it saved when we were in the Plague Desert just before we went into the Dead City. And if we select this other save here, you'll see that it's save 001, so that's the name we gave it, and it's in the level Dead City. So just load this. We'll see we're at the same junction, NPC is still there. If we press tab, our items, we still have a bread. And we can also load, we will go load Dead City, or load the autosave, sorry. And that'll show us that we were here in the desert and we still have our bread. So yeah, let's go on to how we did this. Okay, so one quick bug fix was that occasionally when traveling, well, all the time, when traveling between scenes, the game would get a bit confused and lose track of the items it was meant to be displaying in the GUI, so whether they were nearby or in a container or whatever. So what I've done here is when we're trying to find the nearest container for displaying in the GUI, beforehand, we just basically check if containers in world is null or containers in world.count is 0. Then we just refresh the container so we can find any containers within the scene. And likewise on items, so for nearby items that are on the floor, we just call if items in world is null or the count is 0. We call refresh item list to check if there have been any more dropped on the floor. For this bug, I'm not too sure where it came from, but basically sometimes the player container would be null, and it shouldn't have been because it's set in awake when the player is created, and then the player isn't destroyed on load, so it'll stay through all the scenes until you shut down the game. But occasionally it would be made to null, so basically what this does is when we're setting the player's inventory items, we just do a quick check to see if it's null, and if it is, then we just use set it again by finding the player game object and getting the container on that object. I've also made a quick few changes to how the sort of structure of prefabs work in the game. Well, the serialization controller is one of them. Basically, this now has the global quest store as a child game object. This basically ensures that one copy of the global quest store and all the quests in the game get carried through all the scenes, just to make sure that's always there. Likewise, we've got the also the canvas for the load menu as a child of the serialization controller, and the load control script, which controls the saving and loading that I'll talk about later, is also on there. And also as a change for the player. The player now has the actual canvas for its GUI, so the one that displays all the stats, items, quests, and the map. That is now a child of the player, so you know that, and that makes sure that, again, that the GUI is carried with the player through all the scenes, and basically they're sort of attached, so they can't be separated. Alright, one change I've made to when we're doing the file initialization for a save is after we've called file.create, with the path to the text file that we want to create, we also call .dispose. Basically, this is because there was an error appearing occasionally when it's like an access violation, and as far as I understand it, it was because the file would still be considered open by the operating system, so we couldn't change it at the time. So by calling .dispose, it's basically saying to the operating system that we are done with that file, so we could be free to write to it in the next frame if we were doing a save and load or whatever. And basically this is called, I know I've only got the file initialize example up here, but any other file.create examples, you'd add .dispose to the end of it as well. It doesn't destroy the file, don't worry, despite what the name might imply. It just says we're done with it after we've created it. I've also refactored how stuff's written to file at the moment, because so it was a bit messy. So now it's all done via one method, this loadController.me.writeLines to file, which is part of a new script I wrote for today. What it does, it gets passed in a path to a file and a string array with all the data that needs to be written to that file. And what it basically does is it will write the lines to the file that were contained within the string array. And this basically file.create.filepath.close is basically just a quick way of clearing out the existing file. So because we want to overwrite the entirety of the data, we're not appending it or adding it to the end or whatever. And then we just create a new stream writer, and then we go through each of the lines in the array, and we call streamwriter.writeLine with that line, and then we call close and dispose for the stream writer. And likewise for that, we also have an equivalent method for reading in the data. If I can find it. Yep. So instead of having multiple instances of this in the same file, what we can do, we can just call the method loadController.me.readLines from file, which again, actually just takes in a path this time. And what it does is basically just is a copy and paste of here, but a bit more sort of generic. So it just reads the path, reads the file at the path, and returns a list of strings, which are the contents of that text file. And it's functionally the same, but it's a bit nicer. I just wanted to show you. I've also moved the directory create method from the await function to its own initialize function. This is basically to make sure that on basically the load controller we've written, it will on the awake or start, sorry, it will basically read through all the files in the game directory and see if there is a specific save that was recently used that needs to be loaded from. And I'll go over in a minute, but basically it'll try and find the last save that was used by the player, and it will then set that save to be the current save name, the save directory in the serialization controller, and then it will call initialize. So once we have that current save directory that we're wanting to check from, it'll know where we need to check for if the files are present and correct, if that makes sense. So we're basically just waiting for it to read the we need the serialization controller to wait to read for the load controller to work out which save we're wanting to load first, and then it will call that directory create method when to make sure that the actual directories and files exist. Okay. And finally, I basically just added to the serialization controller, if I can say it, documents/RPG tutorial, because apparently, where is it? Friggin' system.environment.get folder path, system.environment.special folder. My documents doesn't return the actual documents folder. It returns the folder that the documents folder is in. I'm not sure why, but that's how it works. So by adding documents / to there, or /RPG tutorial as our game directory, that basically makes sure that the game saves are saved in the documents folder. Okay, so now we're actually onto the main bit, which is the load controller script. Sorry it took so long, just had a load of things to clear up beforehand. Alright, so first off, we've got a singleton, just so we can access it from anywhere. So public static load controller, me, you know what that does, because I've explained it pretty much every episode. So we've also got three game objects, which are the load GUI parent, save GUI parent, and menu parent. If we just look at the game, we'll see that they correspond to these three objects on the prefab, and these are basically used to switch between the menu states. Next up, we have a string for the save folder path. This is basically the path to the folder where all our saves will be located. So in this case, it'll be it'll be the documents folder plus whatever you've set the game directory to be. Well, the folder the documents folder is in, and then whatever the directory you've set it to be. And yeah. We also got a current save name. Basically, I'll go into the details in a minute, but what I've done, is I've actually created a new file that gets written to just this, to the game directory, which basically records the current save name, or the last used save name, sorry. And that is basically what is loaded. So that is basically stored in there at some point. Public drop down, that's just a drop down so we can get the input of, so we can display all the saves and select them and stuff like that. We've also got two text boxes. This is just for displaying text, so save display and load display. These basically just are the Unity UI text boxes that display text. I don't know what else to say. We've got a public input field, save input. This is just it's a box that allows you to type in. We use that for naming the saves. And these are the imports, so we need unityengine.ui for all the UI menu stuff, system.io for the reading and writing to files, and unityengine.scene management for actually loading the scenes and getting the active scene and whatnot. Okay, and we also have a list string. These are all the names of saves found, so these will be populated into the dropdown, and then you select one, and that returns a number, and then that's the save that you've selected. Okay, and we've also got a bool write default save, which I don't think we use anymore. Sorry, these would use, we don't actually use them. They were to mark out whether we needed to create a default file or not, but I think I've changed it, so unless it comes up, they just ignore them. And menu open is just a way of checking if the menu is open, so we don't open multiple copies of a menu. This is all good. Alright, so we get on to wake now. So if me is null, we set me to this, otherwise we destroy it, so basically just assigning the singleton. Start, it gets a bit more complicated. First off, we just set save folder path to be whatever we set it to, so in this case it's the folder documents is in, plus the game directory and some slashes to make sure the path's all correct. Next up, we basically just get the save display and save input components off the respective parent object. So save GUI parent, .game object, .get component in children text or text input field or whatever. I'll just show you again, these like save parents, they have just the objects as children. So you just get component in children and it will find whatever you're looking for and work all right. Next up, we set both the load GUI parent and save GUI parent to be inactive. So, because we don't want to display all of them at once. Then we call the FineSaves method. So go to that declaration. So string directories is directory.get directories and save folder path, which is just the directory to where the saves are found. So what this does is it gets an array of, I believe it's folder names. So yeah, so it'll basically find all the folders within our save directory. So that is basically the same as all the saves in our save directory. And we'll add, no, it is the paths. Sorry, it's the paths to the folders, not the folder names. So it'll basically add a list of paths into these lists, and then we can clear the current options from the load drop down, and then it will add the found saves from our directory to that. I'll show you that now. So if we just go to load, you'll see that it adds the 2 saves we have. So save one in the Dead City and autosave in the Plague Desert. So if we go back to start. So next up, string temporary is basically load. Drop downs work basically by returning an integer of the index in the list. It returns the index of the item selected. So I'll just show you again. Sorry. So if I just go on load, this currently selected one because it's at the top of the list, it'd be 0. But if we select this one, it'd be 1. And since we do that, we can basically just use saves found, which is, I believe it's in the FineSaves. Yeah, so basically, since we're using the same list, we can set load drop. So basically, we're getting the path of the selected save that we want to use by using this drop down. Sorry, I don't know why it was taking me so long to explain. Yeah, and we also can just get the actual folder name rather than the entire path by using temp.replace, and we pass in the same folder path and then just an empty string. That basically just gets rid of all the folder path, like so it'll get rid of the folder the documents is in, plus whatever your game directory is, and we'll just leave you with the name of the folder that the save is in, which allows it to be used by the serialization controller correctly. Right, and then we set load display.text to be whatever the current save name is. Let's see, go to the check for last folders. Basically what this does is, for our current save, if there isn't currently an on-exit text file, which is a new one, which on-exit is a new text file that I've created. What it stores is basically just the last scene that the player was in. So once you reload a save, it'll know which scene to load first. So if this an on-exit doesn't exist in the current save, then it will just create a file there to act as an example. And I believe on-exit is, where is it kept? Yeah. So set last scene in is on the load controller, and we pass in the scene manager.getActiveScene.name. So that's in the serialized data, which I'll get into in a minute because that's changed as well. So yeah, so serialize set last scene view set last scene in. Yeah, so basically what we're doing is, if scene is the load testing scene, which is just the temporary main menu type screen that we're using, then we call return because we don't want to save it. Otherwise, we basically just write this current scene to the on-exit file for the current save. And yeah, but to do this, we have to put it as a list, just so we can use our new write lines to file to make it a bit more, to use the new write lines file. So it was refactored nicely. Okay, so next up we have our check for last save game file. I'm going to go to the declaration. What this does is it creates a new text file called last save name. It creates it in the actual save folder path rather than in an individual save, because the purpose of it is to basically just store the last save used by the player, so that if they were to click resume when loading the game, rather than just clicking load and selecting a specific save, it would load the correct save. And again, it just says if file that exists at path, or if file does not exist at path rather, it'll call file.createPath and then dispose, just to make sure that the file is actually there. Okay, so next up we should have a check for autosave method, which goes to declaration, which basically just makes sure that we have a folder called Autosave in our directory, so we can have the place to autosave to. And if that doesn't exist, it gets created. Yeah. Next up, we pass in the current save name that we found from getting the save from the load dropdown, and we pass that into the serialization controller so it knows which save to load. And then we finally called that initialize, which will, if you forgot, we'll call directory create and make sure that all the required folders and stuff are in the file, so the data can be written to it. And finally, we call set menu. So this basically just sets the menu parent to be true, so we can see the options of resume, save, load, and exit. Oh yeah. Next up, we go on to update. Okay, so on the first line of update, we're basically saying load display text. So this is basically just text that displays information about the current save selected. We call this method called getSaveDetails, and we pass in this really convoluted line, which basically what this is doing is it's getting the value out of the drop-down that's selected and passing this into saves found. So it's returning, so this bit gets the path of the save that's selected, and then we replace, in the save that's selected, we replace the save folder path with nothing, so we're just left with the folder name, and we call getSaveDetails, which returns the a string containing details of save with to the text, and that'll display it. Now, getSaveDetails. What this does is it will try and read through the onExit path, onExit file at the moment. So basically, it will try and find this file in the save, so it can work out what save that the player is in, and it will basically just return that. It will return level plus data in file 0, because hopefully, if the file is there, it will return just the save name, the scene name that is to be loaded, so we know where it's loading to. Otherwise, it'll just return no save selected if there isn't a onExit tech.txt file in the current save. Okay, go back up to update. If the scene manager gets active scene.name is equal to loading test scene, then we don't do anything because we don't want to close the menu on the main menu. That'd be stupid. But if we do, otherwise, so if we're say in game somewhere and we press escape and the menu is not already open, then if menu is active in hierarchy is false, then we set the timescale to 0, so we pause the game, set menu parent to be active, and we set menu open to be true. And that is what happens on update. So all the rest of the stuff is called via the buttons, so I'll go through them and show you how they work. Okay, so first up, we've got our resume button. This basically just calls loadController.resume. And what this does is basically it sets menu open to be false, so the menu's not open anymore, and we'll disable all the 3 GUI parents for the actual GUI, so GUI isn't displayed anymore. Then it will set time.timescale to 1, and if the scene is currently the loading test scene, so our main menu type screen, it will call serialization control.me.loadScene, and it will call it with the current last scene, which I'll go over in a minute, and it will call it with from menu to true, so it knows to load the player data from that save. And we'll just go to get last scene. What this does is it will open the current saves folder and try and find the file on exit.txt, and then it will try and read from that file, and it will return data in file 0, because it returns the list, so it will return the first element. But the only thing that's stored in this onExit.txt file is the scene name of the last scene that was loaded. So if this file exists and it's been written to, then it will return that scene name. Otherwise, so say if there was an error or there wasn't a scene loaded previously, or maybe the file just didn't exist for whatever reason, we just return Plague Desert, and it will sort of like return, load the player into the Plague Desert level. Okay, so next up we have the save button, which calls loadController.setSave. LoadController.setSave, where is it? Sorry. SetSave basically just sets the save GUI to be active, and then sets the load and menu to be deactivated. And likewise for load, It's called set load, which sets load to be active and save and menu to be not inactive. And you can guess set menu. It says save GUI parent dot set active to false and load GUI to be false, but menu to be true. Next up, we can go on to the load parent GUI instead. So I'll just disable the menu parents. This looks a bit different. So first off, which goes there, we got our text box for displaying info on the save game. We've got a drop down for displaying our list of saves. There's a button here to load the game, which calls our load controller.load game method, which is different to set load. So load game. Basically, it just gets the current save path from the drop down, like we've done before. It will get rid of the save folder path. You'll basically take this path and get rid of the actual path bit, leaving us just with the save folder name. It will set our load display text to be whatever the current save name is. And it will also pass in this load, pass in the current save name to be into the serialization controller as the save directory. So it knows that that new save that was selected is the current save. And then we call serialization controller.me.load scene. And again, we are using that get last scene to find the onexit.txt file from the current save. And we will load that scene, and we call our loading from the menu, so we call true because we want to reload the player's like position and inventory info and stuff like that. And then we call resume, which basically just again disables the menu. So next up we have the menu button, which calls set menu, which I just went over, so we don't need to do that again. It just disables this load bit and returns to the main menu. Next up, we've got the save parents, which controls the saving. So first off, we've got an input field, which allows the player to type in a name for the save. We've got a text to display details about the save. We've got one button here, which calls loadcontroller.savegame. Save game, where is it? Up here. Save game. Okay, so first off, in save game, we have a check for if the current scene is the menu scene, so loading test scene, we return because we don't want to be able to save on that scene. Next, so if it's not the main menu scene that we're using, we just get the name of the save game to be whatever the user has typed in. So save input.text is equal to name. So yeah. You need to do that because basically just make sure that the actual text in the input box stays. Next up, so if the name is not equal to blank and name is not equal to autosave because we don't want to overwrite it, we call if does save with name exist, which basically just goes through all the saves, gets rid of the folder path, and will check if they are equal. So it'll basically check if we already have a save with that current name. What does that code here? If it does, it returns true. Otherwise, it returns false. And where's save? Saves down from here. So if we don't have a save with that name, we basically create a path, which is basically just the save folder path plus the current save name. Sorry, the path of the current save, which is the current save what we all need to use, or that we are currently loaded in. We've got the path of the new save, which is the save folder path plus name, which is the new name that we entered into the input box. Then we call this copy directory method, because basically, if you're wanting to save like it be in the same save game, so sorry. How to best describe this? Basically, what we're doing is we are copying the existing save first, and then we are writing our new data to it. So say, because we'll only be writing new data about the specific scene we're in, but we're also wanting to keep the data from the player's existing save. If that makes sense. So that's what we're doing. So first off, we call this copy directory method, which I got from the Microsoft website. So yeah. So basically, it calls directory info and gets basically takes source directory name and the destination directory name. And what this does is it gets a directory info from the source directory that you pass in, and if the directory doesn't exist, then it just returns an error. Otherwise, it gets all the subdirectories from that file, and if the destination directory doesn't exist, it will create it, and it gets file info on all files in this directory, and it will create a path for the for the new file in the destination directory, so where you're copying it to, and then it calls file.copy to temp path and false, whatever that is. What is that? False, actually. Overwrite. No, we don't want to overwrite it. Next up, we go through each of the subdirectories in this folder. And then we create a path again for the destination directory and subdir.name, and then we call this method again. But in this case, we use the subdirectory.fullname and the temp path. So basically, what this does is it goes through a directory and will copy all the folders and files contained within it and within any subdirectories to the new location in the exact same structure. And that is basically how our save is cloned. And then we set the current save directory to be the new one that we've created, so under name. And we call the serialization controller.me.serialize data. And what this does is, again, it will basically just write all the data to the file. But there's a couple of one change I've made to it that I've not already gone over is, what is it? Well, two changes actually. One is that we are also setting the last scene in to be whatever the current scene is. So that's just here. So passing the current active scene, and that will get written to the onExit.txt file. And also in the player serializer, I've split the method for actually serializing into two. So we no longer need test serialize, that doesn't do anything. So, basically, we've got convert data to writable, which basically calls the serialize player method. So that just writes all the shit to the file. No, sorry, it doesn't write shit to the file. It will get all the player's data and convert it into a format that can be written to the file. And it will store it under player data and player inventory, respectively. And likewise, we have a read data from writable file, which I should have done that. And what that will do is it takes all this data that's been saved and will recreate it in the world. So it sets the ammo, weapon, items, effects, stuff like that. So that's what that is. Controller, and then we will clear the saves that have been found, and then we will just find the saves again, just so we can refresh the list. However, if there is a save of the name that has been inputted into the text box, we want to overwrite it instead. So we don't need to do all that kerfuffle with the cloning the save directory and that. So we just set the last save used to be name. Then we call serialize data, which again just saves it normally and overwrites it and shit. And then we call save found.clear and refresh all the saves and that. That's pretty much it for saving. All right, so finally we got onto the autosave portion, which is pretty easy actually. First off, on load scene, if from menu screen is false, so if we're switching between two scenes in between one save, so just like moving from one level to another, we call this autosave method, which is basically just a clone of the serialized data method, with one change in that it stores the current save directory in a temporary location, and then sets the save directory to be equal to autosave. So basically, from here, all this data is written to the autosave directory rather than just the actual save directory. And then once we've written the autosave, we set save directory back to be the temp directory store. That's pretty much it. Another thing I've changed is that, or if from menu screen is true, so if we're either loading a new save or switching from the menu, And if container.player container is equal to null, so that means that we're loading from the menu, so we don't do anything. But if it's not null, then that means we are loading a new save, but we're already in game. So what we do is we clear the player's container just to make sure that the to make sure that the player's inventory isn't cloned once they get into the new scene and other existing items are added on top of it. So basically it prevents a glitch allowing you to duplicate items when you're loading saves. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Let me just check that we've got no more stuff to cover. And no, that seems to be it. I think we're done for today. So yeah, is there anything else? Refresh item list. Down. Station bug. No item containers. UI, ID right. Yes. Yeah, we are pretty much done for today. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed or found it useful or whatever, I am on Patreon, where you can get early access to the files if that's your jam, and you can vote on what projects you'd like to see me pursue next, because we're almost at the end. I think maybe 4 or 5 more episodes, so a month, but yeah. What else? Loud or Quiet, out on Steam, go buy it, play it, it's awesome and stuff. What else? That's pretty much it. Cheers for watching, and goodbye.